3 weeks left. We got a lot of uncertainty, really, both sides.
You know, you talk about Leo Chenal, who we're going to hear from. It's the time of year when the best players have to play the best, right? I mean, because it's the most balanced the opponents usually are at this time. Now, you know, you may have more talent than some of the teams you play, but this time of year, you're closer in talent on both sidelines than you are at the beginning of the year, and the best players have to play the best.
Well, he's been playing fabulously. I mean,
that's what made me think of that. I mean,
he is completely dominating.
Crazy how good he is.
Yes. CFP is front and center, as it really will be the rest of the way. Again, a quick reminder of where things stand. Georgia, Alabama, Oregon, Ohio State are the top four. The big news in the Big Ten, Michigan jumping Michigan State despite the Spartans' head-to-head win. The Big Ten West claiming spots 18 through 20, including Chenal and company. The Badgers at number 18, and then Purdue and Iowa. Gerry, first time we've had a chance to talk about this since it came out Tuesday night. Interested in your thoughts, particularly how they have the Big Ten's top three arranged. Obviously, Michigan being ahead of Michigan State was a cause of some consternation for some in the Mitten State. But how do you feel about that order? Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State.
Well, I disagree with the order, but I could tell you how I think the committee got to it. So a week ago, I said I was going to research the CFP, and that's what I did. And I found some alarming things about the way the process goes, right? Maybe because I've been critical of it ever since, but I wanted to learn more details. For instance, there's really no quality control. In other words, someone can make a pick or make a ranking without really saying where he or she came to that conclusion, right? How much does the analytics influence a coach? Well, coach may not even look at the analytics. So he may be all video. Someone else might be all analytics. But as a group, there's no borders, there's no parameters. Sometimes it's who speaks the most, not the most qualified voice, which is pretty common, I think, in committees. Work ethics are always different. You know, one person isn't as busy as another person representing one part of the country, and another person is on 3 or 4 committees or has trouble on campus, and he or she doesn't get to really dive into it week to week. Who's watching different conferences? You know, I haven't watched Alabama one snap this year, so I would never say how good they are or how bad they are, but a lot of people are wondering why they're second in the country. Well, who's watching their tape? Maybe nobody is. There's only 2 coaches on it. So is there a coach maybe assigned to the SEC or not? So to answer your question, how do you come up with Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State? I came away Saturday night when we were together on Final Drive, and I said I thought Michigan was the best team in the Big Ten. After watching and studying the tape, I'm going to stick with that. And here's why. The offensive line of Michigan is by far better, playing better right now than the offensive line of Ohio State and Michigan State. And to make a run at the championship in this sport, I think you have to have a good offensive line. So that's one thing. Most people on the committee, they have the opportunity to watch the coach's copy and the TV copy. Most of the committee members watch the TV copy, right? Why wouldn't they? So now they're listening to the announcers, right? They're listening to Joel Klatt's opinion, okay? That influences that person. If you watch the coach's tape, you can study the line play. So that's another issue, and that's how they could get there. So to me, you know, I would put Michigan first, Ohio State second, and Michigan State third. But why not Michigan State head-to-head against Michigan, right? Sometimes the committee says head-to-head matters. 2 weeks ago, head-to-head mattered. Last week, head-to-head didn't matter. If they start over every week, you could see why, after Michigan State beats Michigan, that it could be the other way around. And they say they start over. So the process, if we're going to stick with this process, at the least they could do is have a little bit more quality control and hold people to their rankings based on the way they rank them. And there is
What
no
do you mean
quality.
by hold them based on the way they rank them?
If I'm analytics, I want to explain it to the non-analytic people, right? If I'm a coach and I don't deal with those numbers, okay, I want the numbers explained to me. If I am a coach and I'm really good at watching video, I want to explain to the member of the committee that doesn't watch video why I think Michigan is better than Michigan State and Ohio State. It's because the offensive line is playing better, or the quarterback's playing better, so on and so forth. It just seems to me that there ought to be more sharing of information. And what I hear from people is there's not a lot of that. You could rank 1 through 10 without any explanation whatsoever.
And I want to just give you a proposal, because I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've been thinking about where you stand on it, and I've been thinking about what's practical. And I think in you telling me how long it takes you to watch tape. It has dawned on me that it is just totally impractical that we could have this group watch tape on every team in the way that it needs to be watched to really evaluate it. I mean, you're talking about more hours put into this every single week than people would put into an average work week by a factor of 2, okay?
Correct.
So to me, you just can't do it. There's no way that anyone could sit there and say, I've watched every team, coach's tape, video, and here's what I've concluded. And plus, you don't have people who are qualified to conclude from coach tape anyway. Here's what I think they ought to do. I think they ought to take however many people, 15 people like you, over the summer who evaluate teams and have been coaches before and understand what makes for a great college football team, and say to them, here is a whole boatload of analytics. Here's how you measure offensive line play analytically. I'm going to give you 5 measures of it. You tell me which one you think is the best. And you go on down the line on every possible statistic, and then you just weigh them. Then you just say, I think, okay, what percentage should offensive line play be? Should it be 5%? Right. Should it be 10%? And then you just bake it into a formula. And then at what point does head-to-head not matter? If there's a 8% differential between the two teams, one team's 8% better than the other, at that point, can you say we disregard head-to-head? Like, just go through it and just come up with all the different parameters, save everyone the time, come up with the analytics that you think work, and then just put them all into a computer and let the computer spit it out.
And the counter to that is, unless they change this, I would like to be a tape-watching member and have the analytics spit out 1 through 25. The analytics that they're using now. I agree with you. You're doing a deep dive in the analytics. I think it's a great idea. But right now, if I never watched one play on tape, can't they put the analytics that they have encouraged? Presently, they give me a bunch of analytics.
You're saying in the way that it's set up right now.
In the way that it's set up right now.
Yeah.
They give me the analytics every week. I'm not going to have time to dive into them and dive into my tape and then still be an athletic director somewhere, right? So I'm going to just do what I'm comfortable with. So if I was just watching tape, the analytics that they're making available to me, why can't they put those into a computer and just have the rankings based on no tape? That would help me as a tape watcher.
But then you need to know what goes into the formula.
Well, you want to change the formula, but right now they give every member the analytics.
Yes.
Right? So I'm saying with what they give the member the analytics now, can't they take all those analytics and rate them 1 through 25?
They could. Yes.
And that would be helpful for someone that doesn't look at the analytics.
I think so too. I think it's kind of a mess right now. And I say that totally respecting a lot of the people on that committee and just feeling like they have a really virtually impossible job.
It's virtually impossible.
That has been given to them. Okay, let's dive into some of these games. And there are a couple that really impact the college football playoff rankings this week in the Big Ten. Let's start with Michigan and Penn State. You think Michigan right now is the best team in the Big Ten. What do you think of this matchup with Penn State, who seems to be playing better now that Sean Clifford appears to be healthy?
Right, I'm going to sound like a committee member. I think they're the best team, but I would be surprised if Penn State won the game. I mean, this is a scary game for Michigan. I mean, they've got Ohio State down the road. They are definitely going to be ready for Ohio State, right? They're going to Penn State, difficult place to play. It's not the whiteout, but it's still really difficult to play. The advantage I believe that Michigan has is their run game. I still think that the Penn State defense is a very good defense, but it's better against the spread attack. And especially since they lost Mustafa, he was really an anchor inside. He would be a guy you'd want in the Michigan game. The red zone for Penn State, red zone for Michigan rather, is an issue. They're only scoring 55% of the time touchdowns when they're in the red zone. That can cost you a game in State College for a big game. So to me, scary game for Michigan. The fact that they do have a good run game, I think, what's the expression? The run game travels. It really does, and it could help them. But I'll be shocked if this isn't a nail-biter.
I'm with you. 7 red zone field goals last 2 games. It's a problem for Ohio State, too.
Yeah.
Ohio State's had to settle for, we've seen a lot of Noah Ruggles here this year, and he's really good, but it's an issue.
You know, the interesting thing about it being an issue for Ohio State is, for Michigan, is they're a running team. And historically, if you're a good running team, you're better in the red zone because the depth of the field, the secondary is not threatened by the deep ball, so they're always supporting the line of scrimmage. It's not surprising that Ohio State's struggling, and it's not surprising for any passing team to struggle. But for Michigan to struggle in the red zone is really an unusual thing because they're so good at the run.
Let's get into Ohio State. I mean, this is a really difficult stretch of schedule coming in for them, right? I mean, you've got Purdue coming up here, and then Michigan State, and then Michigan. There has been some question. I mean, there's really no marquee victory on the schedule at this point for Ohio State. I mean, now you've got 3 games. I mean, again, this is why I've always thought, regardless, even when they were on the outside looking in at the top 4, that if they won out, they were going to make it because they've got all these huge games. But winning out is easier said than done, starting this week with Purdue.
This Purdue thing is just, it's incredible that we talk about their defense. I mean, historically, they've thrown the ball. Jeff Brom was hired, I think, culturally because he was a passing coach. But their defense has set this up where Ohio State may have to run the ball to win. I mean, when was the last time we said Ohio State had to be able to run the ball against them? Right? This is very unusual circumstances. And Purdue's struggling running the ball, too, which will hurt them in Columbus. The issue with Ohio State is their offensive line should be playing better. I can remember you and I can't remember what show it was, and I made mention that every offensive lineman that started for Ohio State at one point in the season all had 70 numbers. That means that they were probably recruited as tackles. Tackles are much more athletic than guards, and they were playing really well. But recently, they haven't. So for Ohio State to have Henderson in the game, and I said this on Final Drive as well, I'm off the balance kick, okay? I mean, I think that's the best way to go.
Right.
But I'm going to put it this way. I think it's better said that if Henderson isn't a major concern for the defense, then there's something wrong with Ohio State's offense. So forget about the numbers. Is Purdue's defense going to be threatened by Travion Henderson down after down in neutral or running downs? And if he's not, then that's a problem for Ohio State. So
is the reason they're not threatened by him right now play calling?
No.
So what's the issue? It's the offensive line, period.
Honestly,
period.
I think, and this is a group that was on the Joe Moore Award list earlier in the year and is no longer on it. Michigan's still on it, but Ohio State's not on it. Sure. I felt like it was play calling Saturday night, and then when I watched the tape, I thought Ryan did a great job in neutral downs and running downs trying to run the ball. He went to the pass because the run game wasn't good enough. It was the right thing to do as a play caller.
It's crazy. He's too good a running back for him not to be someone that everyone is kind of thinking about, right? He's really good.
He's really good.
Yeah, really, really talented guy. All right, we'll get more from Gerry coming up later in the show. We have a ton of ground to cover, though, here on Big Ten Today. He's the leading tackler on one of the top defenses in the nation. We'll get to know Wisconsin linebacker Leo Chenal. But next, we will turn our attention to short pants. Andy Katz here with the biggest opening night storyline. Stick around. We're down to 2 in Big Ten soccer. Exciting semis yesterday. Top seed Penn State blanked Michigan, and Indiana survived in overtime against the 7th seed Northwestern. So it's the Hoosiers and Nittany Lions for all the marbles, Sunday noon Eastern time here on the Big Ten Network. Let us get now to our big story. Hoop season is upon us. All 14 Big Ten teams got going over the last couple nights, with 12 emerging with W's, including all 5 of the conference's ranked teams. Among the biggest stories, Michigan State did fall to Kansas by 13 in what it was the highest profile game. Ohio State needed a buzzer beater from Zed Key to survive Akron's upset bid, while Rutgers went to overtime but still topped Lehigh last night. Andy Katz is with us, as he was last night in studio, kind enough to stick around and chat a little bit more. And let's start with Michigan State. You were there, you were at the Garden with 20,000 of your closest friends. It looked like it was just a tremendous atmosphere. I don't think many people expected Michigan State to win this game. There's certainly, you never count a Tom Izzo team out. But it really was, what did we learn about this team, and how can they build here going forward into the season? So what were your biggest takeaways?
I mean, yeah, first of all, when you compare Kansas, Kentucky, and Duke, I thought Michigan State had the toughest draw because Kansas is the most experienced team. And if you put them in a hat, I would think Kansas is the one potential favorite to win the title. So for Michigan State, a lot of new pieces, especially at the point. Now, A.J. Hoggard played very well. Tyson Walker, the transfer from Northeastern. What we saw was there is a difference going from the Colonial to the Big Ten or Big 12 in this instance in terms of speed, size. And I think there's an adjustment period. So that Hoggard-Walker combination will just take some sort of figuring out. I mean, they had 6 turnovers combined, 16 overall for Michigan State, which, as Tom was telling me after, Tom Izzo, that is too many. Free throws, 9 of 16, that has to improve. But we saw that Max Christie is clearly their most talented player. He's just not ready yet to be the go-to guy. That will come in time. So, Spartan fans, be patient. I also would say that this schedule is not as daunting as he normally plays. Yes, he's in Atlantis, but it's not top 10 Atlantis. They go to Butler, but that's Butler at the lower third of the Big East. So I think they have time to sort of find their way here.
I noticed that this year, too. I mean, he normally just goes all out, right? He plays these crazy schedules, and it does seem like he toned it down just a little bit. It'll be interesting to see if Christie emerges. I mean, incredibly talented McDonald's All-American. But again, that's a lot. That's a huge load to put on a freshman. We saw Michigan last night, speaking of freshmen, and their freshmen are really good. That was one of the takeaways, no doubt. But that was a game where we were sitting there in the green room. I mean, that first half, man, they played fabulously against a Buffalo team that very well could end up in your bracket in March, that is the favorite in the MAC. And then that game got tight. So what did you take away from watching Michigan eventually pull away?
So clearly what the Wolverine staff told me earlier in the day is the truth of what they're trying to do, which is to go everything through Hunter Dickinson. I mean, he ended up taking, he was 11 of 17 for 27 points and 6 boards. And so that 17 number, I won't be shocked if that's consistent, that he takes around 17 shots. Eli Brooks was the steady presence, which is what they expect. But while Caleb Houston, I think, has got unbelievable potential, Diabate does as well. Devontae Jones, obviously another one, transition coming up from Coastal Carolina. It's players like Terrence Williams, who suddenly emerged. And that's what's been the beauty of Michigan, I think, whether it's John Beilein or now Juwan Howard. They always have a guy that we weren't talking about in the preseason that suddenly becomes much more of a relevant participant.
Yeah, career high for him last night. So perhaps that, again, where you talk about the pressure on the freshmen. And look, their freshmen are going to have to be really good for them to be a national championship caliber team, which they can be. But some of those holdovers, you talk about Brooks, such a steadying presence, and obviously Dickinson is a tough matchup for people. What about Indiana? Mike Woodson's debut. They played maybe a little bit closer than expected game against an Eastern Michigan team that's kind of middle of the road in the MAC, presumably. Stan Heath taking over there. He's got a lot of new pieces, but Indiana has a lot of new pieces too. They went heavy into the portal. Seemed like that front court, though, is going to be a load.
Yeah, first of all, do you notice the trend here of the MAC schools? I mean, in our region here, I mean, they obviously are prepared for the Big Ten teams early. But look, TJD, he's a Big Ten Player of the Year, first-team All-American candidate. He had 21, 3 blocks, 3 assists. Miller Kopp, within the Big Ten. He needs to produce. He went there to play off of Trace Jackson Davis. He only had 3. Xavier Johnson ended up with 14. They were 4 of 24 on threes. I thought what was missing in this game was someone like Al Durham, who's already now playing well for Providence. Another experienced guard. And so, Rob Finney, he struggled. I mean, he was 3 of 11. They're going to have to need, I think, another guard to emerge on a steadying basis. Is that Miller Kopp as sort of another perimeter player? That is what I think they're going to need going forward. But look, 62 points defensively. They're going to have to be pretty pleased with that.
Yeah, that 4 of 24 number is disturbing because, again, that was really a point of emphasis. And it's one night. And I just think you can't read too much into one night. But no doubt they expected better. And you talk about teams that needed to get better shooting the 3. Rutgers is one of those teams from last year, too. And they were 1 of 13 last night against Lehigh. They got taken to overtime. I don't necessarily think you set off alarms when you get taken to overtime early on. I think it tests a team's mettle, and they were able to emerge. But certainly some questions after watching the Scarlet Knights last night.
So the positive, Lehigh is a solid Patriot League team. They ended up scoring 70 in overtime. So defensively, I think you could argue that Rutgers played well, which is what they do for the most part. It does sort of put a spotlight on how thin the line would have been if Geo Baker and Ron Harper Jr. didn't come back, because they almost didn't. Because they already lost Montez Mathis, Jacob Young, and Miles Johnson. Can you imagine if they lost all 5? I mean, it would be a complete rebuild. So those 2 veterans come back. Cliff Amourier.
Nicely done.
All right.
Look at you. You practiced all night.
I did practice all night. He looked like he could be the guy that they expect. He played obviously behind Miles Johnson this year. Now he's asserting himself. But it just feels like they, is it McCallum, okay, someone else needs to emerge on a consistent basis for them. I think they're going to be a tournament team, but they looked very bubblicious last night in one game.
I think so, too. And if you're going to be on the bubble, you can't afford to lose games like that. I was talking last night in studio. I did the Michigan-Oakland game last year, right? And Oakland ended up being 12-18, and they took Michigan to overtime early in the year, and Michigan won. And at that time, we thought maybe Michigan was a bubble team. They ended up being a number 1 seed. But if you're going to be in that spot, it doesn't mean you play a bad game early in the year or you get taken down to the wire by an opponent that's not all that good in the long run. I'm not saying Lehigh isn't going to be good in their league, but it's a team that an NCAA tournament caliber Big Ten team expects to beat. I don't think it necessarily says you're not going to be that team that you hope to be. Anything else that we should take from this first couple days?
I'd say the main thing is Illinois. We just don't know yet. Right. Obviously, Jacob Grandison playing well is tremendous for them. Coleman Hawkins. But no Kofi Coburn, no Andre Curbelo, no Trent Frazier. So they need to obviously be whole before we fully judge them. And Kofi Coburn expected to be back for that Hall of Fame tournament. I'll actually be down there in Kansas City. And, the game against Cincinnati, possibly Arkansas, would be a great sort of momentum builder for the Illini.
We get to see Maryland tonight. Do you want to try Q? You want to try that on the way out?
I'm going to go with Q or Q-Dose. Q-Deuce?
Qudus Wahab and Fats Russell in action tonight. Maryland hosting George Washington, or just Q, right here on the Big Ten Network, 6:30 Eastern. You can also watch it, as always, on the Fox Sports app. Great stuff, Andy. We'll see you next week. Joel Klatt's with us next. His take on a busy week. Everything from Scott Frost to the playoff rankings. That is coming up as Big Ten Today continues. Some rough news for Wisconsin this morning. Ches Malusi, the Big Ten's 5th leading rusher, is out for the season after suffering a leg injury in last week's win over Rutgers. Of course, a positive note for the Badgers. Braylon Allen has been great. 5 straight 100-yard games, but sorry to see Malusi go down for the year. And very pleased to be joined, as we are each and every Thursday, by Fox Sports lead analyst Joel Klatt. Joel, let's start here. You were at Nebraska this past weekend, and then on Monday, the school announced a restructured contract for Scott Frost. He is going to stay for at least this next year. They did fire several of his offensive assistants, almost the entire offensive staff, after spending some time around the Huskers this past week. What do you make of this move?
Yeah, so I've done 2 of their games this year, and I can tell you that that's a pretty darn good football team that has faced a ridiculously tough schedule and made too many mistakes in the games that they should have won. And I know that that's a broken record, and I said that on the telecast. That, I mean, stop me if you've heard this before. Nebraska, good enough for the upset, but a couple of mistakes here and there, mainly in special teams, really. If you were to just clean up their special teams this year, you probably give them 2, maybe 3 more victories. And this is a totally different story, in particular with the schedule that they have faced. Scott has built something that I think is far better than what it was a few years ago. I think any of us, and listen, you're close to it too. You see it just like I do. That's the 4th team that they've played in the top 8 of the college football playoff rankings. And the 3 previous to this last Saturday, they lost by a total of 13 points, and then they're down 6 in a 1-possession game, basically late, taking timeouts right there. Could have stopped Ohio State and forced a punt, but they got a field goal. So, I mean, they've played some of the best teams in the country very tough. Every coach that I talked to throughout the conference and even at Oklahoma talked about how good Nebraska was and how close they were and how difficult it was to play against them. And so I just thought that they were way too far along the road of rebuilding to turn around now. I think that would have been a poor choice. And so I'm really thrilled that Trev Alberts made the decision that he did. And I think the restructuring benefits everybody. It obviously benefits the school because it's going to lower their number if they do need to make a decision next year. And by the way, Scott admitted it to me in person last week that if he doesn't win next year, he'll walk away because he thinks that next year is the year, in particular with the schedule that they'll have. But Rev, not only did the buyout lower, but Scott basically did what Tom Brady has done throughout his career, is he restructured in order to create space for more impactful assistant coaches. Okay, so he takes $1 million less, and it's not just like, oh, well, it wasn't a good year, he's taking $1 million less. See, athletic directors view their pool of money that they pay their coaches in kind of a total pool. And that includes the head coach. So a lot of them will think about, let's just use round numbers like, okay, I've got $8 million or $9 million or $10 million to pay my football staff, the head coach and the 10 assistant coaches. And so what Scott basically did is he created just under $3 million total dollars with the moves that they made on the offensive staff and his reduction of $1 million. Now they have just under $3 million to go and make a hire. I think that their pool of guys that they can hire now just raised up a level because of the dollars that they created to do that.
I hear you. I think there's a trade-off on the other side that if you go there, you know we are really under the gun here, and we have to get it right. And so when you go, you're knowing there's the possibility you only go for a year. But if, as you say, they pay more, then maybe someone in a risk-reward ratio is willing to make that risk. What about Ohio State? You got a chance to see them in that game, as you said. I mean, it went right down to the wire. It was as close to a one-score game as you could possibly be without being a one-score game, a 9-point victory for Ohio State. It was the second straight week they've had a reasonably close game. To what extent are you concerned about the Buckeyes, particularly offensively?
Yeah, so the offense, after looking like world beaters, and granted against poor competition, has really come back to earth the last couple of weeks, first against Penn State and then Nebraska. I would say, and I think that this needs to be said, Brent Pry and what he does defensively for Penn State, and we talked about it last week, and what Eric Chenander and that Nebraska defense have done this year, those are two very good units. And so I think it would probably be too high of expectations to think that Ohio State's going to roll out there and just blow the doors off of those two defenses. I think those are two of the better defenses that they will have played all season long. Having said that, the worry that I have for Ohio State now after covering a few times is that I just don't feel like the commitment to the run game is there enough early. Too many times I think in our sport, in particular with teams that have high-powered offenses that are used to big chunk plays, is that they won't just be patient and take the little gains or take body shots in order to open up bigger runs later. I feel like throwing the ball over 50 times is not advantageous for C.J. Stroud, even with that great receiving core. And we saw Jackson Smith and Jigba do things that no receiver at Ohio State has done in a single game in terms of number of catches. So they can do it. There's no doubt. I just don't think it's advantageous for them to get into a game in which they're throwing it over 50 times. So they've got to run the football better. The one thing I have been very impressed with Ohio State is their ability to play really solid defense. You know, since we've seen the change in scheme and play caller going to Matt Barnes, this team is the number 3 scoring defense in college football. I think they're the second total defense and they're first in sacks. They're creating a lot of pressure on the quarterback. They're developing young players, and that side of the ball is much more of a known commodity now and something that I think they can rely on versus what they had to begin the season.
They'll be tested against Purdue, no doubt about that. But as you say, definitely vastly improved. The concern is the offense. I mean, 4 touchdowns now in their last 27 possessions. What about the playoff rankings coming out on Tuesday night? You've seen Michigan and Michigan State. You saw them against one another, with, of course, Michigan State winning the game. There has been a kerfuffle, as you know, here in Big Ten country, with Michigan now ranked ahead of the Spartans. What do you make of all this?
Well, you can't make anything of it. It's absurd. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Gary Barta can sit there and say whatever he wants to say. Michigan above Michigan State is absurd. And it completely deteriorates any trust that committee had, which I would say is very little. You know, building trust in a general sense, just for human beings and interpersonal relationships or group dynamics, it takes a lot of time. You know, it's like a delicate piece of art. It takes a lot of time to build trust. And the problem with that delicate piece of art is that it takes just an instant to ruin it and to crush it and to break it. I think the committee with this week's rankings, while they, quote, don't mean anything, even though we know that they do, I think that they destroyed a lot of their credibility for whatever will happen moving forward. And I also believe that what they did outside of the top 10 didn't make any sense. There's really not having Penn State ranked, and yet Wisconsin and Auburn sitting there ranked when they all have the same record, and I saw Penn State beat both of those teams. That's a problem. Rev, right? Like, I don't know how else to say it. The credibility of the ranking system is shot. And that's why I don't want to take personal shots. It's not the problem of the individual committee members. It's just that the system that they have with no objective criteria, all subjective criteria, leads itself to this. An absurd ranking. Michigan over Michigan State is a disastrous precedent to set for college football. 9 days ago, I'm not crazy, I woke up and I was like, hold on, I'm going to go back and watch that DVR. I'm pretty sure I called the game, didn't I? Yes, I did. Saw that game with my own two eyes, along with 9.2 million people. So they're telling us that the game that had more viewers than any college football game in the season didn't happen. Nope. Just didn't happen. Nothing to see here.
I hear you. I guess I just have such a hard time getting bent out of shape about it because I feel like it's all going to play itself out. If Michigan State wins out, they're going to go to the college football playoff. If Michigan wins out, they're going to go to the college football playoff. But I hear what you're saying.
It erodes the trust, though, right?
Yeah,
so at the end, like, let's say we get into a situation where they're comparing teams at the end. It's like, do you trust them to make the right decision? I don't.
Yeah. All right, fair enough. Back on Big Ten today, Wisconsin's Leo Chenal, one of 18 semifinalists for the Chuck Bednarik Award, given to the nation's top defensive player. Chenal leading the Badgers in tackles. He's third in the Big Ten in tackles for loss. Aiden Hutchinson, George Karlaftis, Jaquan Brisker also making that list. And we are very pleased to be joined now by Leo Chenal. He is today's big interview. And Leo, let's start with this. What does it mean to you to see your name on a list like that one?
It's just a big honor being included in a list like that, and some big names. You see some really talented guys on this list, and it's just a big honor.
Well, this defense has been phenomenal this year. You guys lead the nation in total defense. It seems like that happens more often than it doesn't with this Wisconsin D. How much do things like that fuel you guys, being the top defense in the country?
It's something we take pride in. Just trusting the coaches and trusting our assignments. We always expect, like, we need to stop them. We need to get a 3-and-out right away. We need to get negative rushing yards. It's always something we take pride in, for sure.
You mentioned trusting the coaches. Jim Leonhard has done such a good job with this defense. What makes him so good as a defensive coordinator?
He's just a genius. He knows exactly what strengths to play to each and every guy we have on the field. He'll activate different guys and different schemes and change it up in a lot of ways. He's really good at adjusting. That's a huge thing. If we ever have a problem, he fixes it right away and corrects us and keeps us sharp.
Now, this offense has picked it up lately, but that group really struggled early in the year. How challenging is it when you have one unit of the ball that's really playing well and the other side of the ball isn't playing as well? How tough is that on the group that frankly was playing well?
It's just anytime we're out on the field, we're going to be happy to be out there. We love getting out on the field. We got to pick each other up. If one side's playing not so good ball, we got to pick each other up. If we're struggling in the offense, they're going to go out and make a play, and we're just going to feed off that. So anytime we're on the field, we're going to try our best to ball out.
I want to get a bit into your background because it's really interesting to me. You are from a small town, Grantsburg, Wisconsin, about 1,300 people. It's actually far closer to Minneapolis than it is to Madison or Milwaukee. How did growing up in a small town impact you and kind of shape who you are?
Everybody knows each other. Everybody has a really close relationship, knows all the news around town. Everybody's friends, knows each other's parents. So I just feel all the support from my community, and I love that, and it fuels me. Yeah.
All right, so I'm blown away by this. You have 15 siblings, right? 8 full siblings, 7 half siblings. Can I just ask a practical question before we get into that? How many bathrooms in your house?
Oh, man. 2, 3, 4. I think it's 5 or 6.
Okay.
Something like that.
All right. That seems workable. Okay, so I have a friend who is one of 10 children. And I asked her about this. I said, tell me what it's like to grow up with 10 kids. And she said, well, like when you're in second or third grade and your mom's making your lunch, you don't get any say on what you get for lunch. She just hands you a bag on the way out, and that's what you get. So that was her story. What's your story about growing up with 15? Kind of give us a sense of what that's like day to day.
Oh man, every meal is just my mom is one of the hardest workers I know in my entire life. Every single meal is just an entire buffet. She's providing 3 meals a day for us, unlimited food. Even though she lands out a whole buffet for us, there's almost never leftovers. Ton of hungry people in the family. A lot of fights too, and I think that's what molded my brother and I to be so competitive and stuff. We're always competing with each other. We always have somebody to turn to if we ever have any problems. So yeah, it's definitely built a competitiveness to us.
How big is the dining room table? Or do you guys eat in shifts? I mean, I'm just interested in practically how this works.
It's pretty big. We just got a few years ago, we got a 600-pound marble top. It's 12, 15 feet long, big bench on each side. So my dad's, kind of gotten to be a pro at this. So that's awesome.
You mentioned your brother, John. Of course, he's a fullback on this Wisconsin team. I know you guys are really competitive with one another. Tell me what that was like growing up and kind of feeding off one another.
In short, I would say it's bloody. When you got an older brother, you're constantly pushing each other to be better, and sometimes it gets chippy. Our mom would have to separate us, just punching each other in the face and getting a little too physical sometimes. But it's always fun. Again, I have older brothers that I've always looked up to my whole life, and John and I have looked up to them as inspiration and motivation to be great. But, I definitely attribute a lot of success to having an older brother, for sure.
So was it just him you were competitive with, or were you, to the point of coming to fisticuffs with one another?
Yeah, I mean, there was something between John and I where it's we were starting to get the same height, same weight. I was catching up to him a little bit in skill. He was obviously still above me. But it's just when you get two guys and you're just kind of close in that range of weight, height, speed, it's you're just constantly competing in everything.
Now, he got married this summer. How has life as a married man changed John?
I think it's the same John. He's spending a lot of time with his wife, and he's also making time for his family. You can just see how much more mature he's gotten over the years, and I was really happy for him.
You were the state player of the year in high school, and yet you were not particularly heavily recruited. Tell us a bit about your recruiting story.
Growing up, going into, freshman, sophomore, junior year of high school, my brother John and I, we loved the game of football. We worked hard at it. But we didn't really see ourselves as, going to college or going to the next level, anything like that. But, talking with our coaches, they're like, all right, maybe you should go to camps, go check things out. And it wasn't until then we actually started, getting a little recognition and talking to some people. We were like, okay, maybe we can do this thing.
And so it came down to Wisconsin and a bunch of FCSs. Is that right? Or were there other FBS schools that were involved? I committed very early in the recruiting process. I was talking to a few other FBS schools. I didn't get an offer. Wisconsin was my first FBS offer, and I was really excited about it, and I hopped on the train right away. I think I committed a day later, I believe. Did that fuel you at all, the thought that people weren't really falling all over themselves to get you?
I would, at the time, I wouldn't say so. Again, I was thinking I wasn't very confident in myself. I love football, but I was thinking oh dang, the Wisconsin Badgers just offered me. That's awesome. It's my home state. I wasn't thinking about anything else besides that offer, and I was so excited. There wasn't any place I'd rather be, and I just hopped on the train right away.
If you're saying you weren't that confident in yourself, at some point you became confident in yourself. Clearly, what happened? What happened to make you realize, hey, I belong here?
I would just say going through the practices, at first before practices, you see these huge 6'5", 330-pound guys walking in after coming from a small school like myself, and you're like, dang, like how am I gonna be able to compete with this? How am I gonna be able to go against these guys? But just going through practices and just feeling what I'm capable of, it just happened that way.
You play like a man possessed on the field, and yet by all accounts, you're a pretty laid-back guy off of it. How do you flip that switch?
It's just I'm not a very social guy, like you said, but football, it's different. You don't need to be social. You don't need to start conversations. You just need to bring energy. It doesn't matter really what you say. You just got to be able to bring energy, make plays, and have guys feed off of you. So it's kind of my cup of tea.
You write the words "death row" on your hand before every game. Explain that tradition to me.
Death row was started by Chris Orr, the legend himself. A lot of guys look up to him. He was a tremendous leader, especially in the linebacker room. I'll say it, the greatest leader I've ever seen. I was completely in awe of that guy. Great guy. But he started that, and it's like a rite of passage. Death row means the guy that's willing to work hard, lay it out on the line, complete grit, just putting your team above yourself.
Last thing I want to ask you, looking ahead to the game this weekend, it's been interesting to watch Northwestern offensively this year. They've been through 3 starting quarterbacks now, and certainly the last 2 are very different in Helinski and Marty. So how challenging is it in terms of putting together a game plan when you've got 2 guys and it's not really clear which one of them will start?
It just comes down to trusting our assignments. If we know our rules, trust the coaches, it'll just come down to that. And Northwestern always, puts up a fight. They're always a tough team every year, no matter what their record is. So it'll be a challenge for sure.
Well, looking forward to watching the game. Leo Chenal, really good to get to know you a little bit. Congratulations on all your success.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So you got that game in the West. You got this one as well. Minnesota and Iowa. Gerry returns. Get you set for Floyd of Rosedale as we wrap things up. Dramatic conclusion of Big Ten Today next.
The victors of this border battle earn a final privilege. Carry a prized bronze pig back to campus. Or as Iowans and Minnesotans like to say, bring home the bacon.
One of the great rivalries in the Big Ten and one of the great rivalry trophies taking center stage Saturday right here on the Big Ten Network. Iowa and Minnesota battling for Floyd of Rosedale, a game with massive Big Ten West implications. You see 3:30 Eastern time for that one. It follows the battle between Indiana and Rutgers, all on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Really excited about that one. And again, this is a game with massive division title implications, and kind of you lose, and I know there's some crazy stuff that could happen. Maybe you still win it, but probably not. It's probably an elimination game. What do you see as you break it down?
Okay, first of all, leave it to Brett Bielema to find an old-fashioned solution to trying to beat Minnesota. I'm not a numbers guy, I know that, but I have to share some with you.
Okay, please do.
This is the starting yard line for Minnesota. First quarter, minus 25, minus 25. Second quarter, minus 25, 17, 48, plus 43. Third quarter, one drive. They had one drive in the third quarter. They started on their own 11-yard line. Fourth quarter, minus 20, 14, minus 2.
Helps to have a great punter.
Field position, yeah, it helps to have a great punter, but if you're not an explosive offense,
right,
which Minnesota obviously isn't. Time of possession, Illinois out-timed them just a little bit, but Minnesota's leading the conference time of possession with 35 minutes.
Yeah,
they had 29 minutes. It's crazy how Illinois got Minnesota off their game plan. And why this answers this question is this is how Iowa wants to play the game as well. Iowa is very similar to Illinois when they put together their game plan. So the book's out.
Yeah, well, the book is out for sure. What about Iowa offensively? Did they get well last week, or is that more a function of who they played?
More a function of who they played. Again, offensive line play has not been strong in this entire conference, and Iowa's taken a little bit of a step back.